Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us Janet Perez Eckles, and she's with JC Empowerment Ministries. Welcome to the program, Janet.
Thank you, Mike. A joy to be with you.
Hey, so I know you've been recognized as a top-noted speaker and a best-selling author and radio personality and missionary and award-winning Spanish interpreter and life coach. And I think that's really amazing. And I think that is probably like, wow, when do you sleep and what do you find time to do all this? But you are admired because this is achieved all without physical sight. So can you give us a little bit about your background and how you are approaching all of these wonderful ministries and job titles, just as fitting them into real life, but then also with that sight aspect?
Wow, yeah. As you were mentioning those things, I'm thinking, do I do all that?
Yeah, right.
I guess I do. But, here's the thing, Mike. It's not so much how I do it. Of course, technology is wonderful today that I can use a screen reader to operate my computer. But more than how I do it, it's why I do it. And I think it's because I made a choice a long time ago. I lost my sight completely when I was 30, and I was a happy mom of my 3, 5, and 7-year-old little boys. And that sudden blindness because of the retinal disease just took me for a loop. It wasn't something I expected. It wasn't something I thought I deserved. And I couldn't bear the thought of living the rest of my life in darkness. But, at that point, what I had to do, Mike, is make a decision whether to sink into defeat and poor me, self-pity, and boo-hoo the rest of my days, or look up and recognize what I still had. So I made the choice and made the decision that life is not about what you cannot do because of circumstances out of your control, but success comes when you recognize what you can do with what God has given you. So I had to realize I still can talk and I can hear, I can love, I have passion, I'm able to teach and inspire others. So I chose to focus on that. So I keep myself busy doing all of the things that you had mentioned, in spite of my blindness.
Well, you know how some people, you might have heard this before, wow, that person is a really excellent salesperson. Can you teach me what you do to increase sales? And they would say, I don't know. I just do what I do. And sometimes it's just how people are wired. Well, you said 2 words over and over and over again in your introduction there. Do you know what 2 words that I'm going to bring out and focus on?
Oh, you better say them to me because I've said a lot of things. Making a choice.
Yep, choice and decision. And it just now is part of you, but I'll bet you back then you weren't thinking, I need to make a choice. I should make a decision. You were dealing with that tragedy, but at some point you made a choice and a decision to move past it, to make best of it. And it's kind of like the old saying, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Do you remember when that kind of point was where you made that choice and made that decision?
Well, actually, what happened is that situations didn't change, circumstances didn't change. I was still a mom. I still had to get things done. So in my mind, I had to think, well, okay, if I don't do them, who's going to do them? And I could, of course, sit back and say, but I can't see how am I going to do this. And that is precisely what I teach, Mike. You mentioned at the beginning of what you just stated, the fact that sometimes salespeople, for example, or people who are trying to perform in a company or in their workplace, they can say to themselves, well, I don't have what it takes. I can't do it, or I have this problem or this obstacle. But, we have the ability to be able to look beyond the circumstance, beyond the obstacles and say, wow, I think I can use my creativity, my determination, my tenacity to be able to get it done. And what I do with my audiences, as I do in my books as well, is teach them, how do you face a circumstance? Right now we're going through so much nowadays, so many horrible things are happening in the world. People are being filled with what? Fear. And sometimes it's that fear that brings on stress. Stress brings on anxiety and then depression. So what happens when you face any of all those is that you can't perform in the workplace, you really can't have a happy home life, and you can't even serve well in the church, for example. So how do we go beyond it? And it's the same thing I had to do is what I teach, and that is overcome the fear. I was so fearful to be able to live the rest of my life being blind. But then I realized that even though I recognize and acknowledge the fear, I have to make the decision to move forward in spite of the fear. And that has been, I think, something that has helped me quite a bit.
I agree, and I love that explanation, and it made me think of something else. I've heard it said, and I've heard it from Les Brown, but you've probably heard it from many other speakers, but, when you're dealing with tragedy and circumstances like that, he says, if you can look up, you can get up. And I think it's interesting because that's a nice concept, meaning, I got knocked down on my back, but I can look up so I can get up. Well, if you can look up, I would even say that you would agree with this too. If you can look up and put your eyes where they need to be, which is on God, on the Lord, on what we have, not only in Christ, but just in life. But if you can look up, boy, that kind of raises your perspective. And then the other thing you mentioned was, maybe look around. So if you can look up and around, meaning when this happened to you, you had responsibilities and people you're caring for and people depending on you. So if you don't make those decisions and those choices to move ahead and make the best of things, you have people that are going to be affected. So you had two things that were helping you make those pull decisions and pull choices, which is focusing on God and then focusing on your family.
Right. And, let me expand a little bit on that, Mike. You're so right. Sometimes, as Les Brown has said, you have to look up. And for me, it's a kind of a pun intended, right? I couldn't really look up with my eyes, but I had to look up with my heart. Yes. And I came to the decision that sometimes, in fact, most often, circumstances can happen to you. Circumstances can happen around you, but those circumstances must never affect what's in you, what's within you. Because what we have within us is the power of God through Christ to be able to help us overcome, defeat, and rise above whatever it is that we're facing. So you're right. Being able to look beyond it is so important. But what do we look to is God's help, God's guidance, God's grace to be able to achieve all that. Now, when I was losing my sight, if someone would have said to me, Jenny, someday you're going to write books, you're going to be traveling by yourself around the country, around the world, speaking, and I would have thought, are you kidding me? There's no way. Don't you know I'm just dealing with this moment. I need to be able to just get through this day to deal with my blindness. But the thing is that God had already a plan. He had already orchestrated a very designed path for my life. And when I chose to see beyond my blindness and see what he would do, that's when doors began to open. I began my career as an interpreter, and I began to write and to speak. And it's just been a really interesting journey. And that is the same journey, Mike, that I like to teach to my audiences. Because if they're stuck in a place where, because of personal conflicts, because of stress, because of just the bad news that you hear every day almost, they're stuck in a place and they can't move beyond it. And so that's where I bring in a path, kind of a little map for them to have that same joy, that same sense of success in spite of what's going on around us. And I'll have to tell you the story, too, of how it was called the excuse eraser. That was interesting, too. So.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I think that's interesting because guess what? When you were at the point of making these choices, you could have probably come up with a lot of excuses. Yeah, but
let me tell you a story. It's interesting.
How does the excuse eraser fit into that?
I know. I was speaking at a large international conference, and it was a group of salespeople. And as I usually do, I ask about their needs. What is it that they want their group to take away? What message do they want to hear? What transformation or inspiration do they want to be impacted with? And I always like to find out about the background and things like that. And as I was talking to them, I found that a lot of them were coming from different countries, which gave me a clue that I had to speak and give illustrations that would speak to those different cultures. So before I was to go on stage, I was in the green room, and someone mentioned that the previous keynote speaker the previous year was John C. Maxwell. Well, I happen to admire him. He's like my role model. I mean, I heard his books on audios, and I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, he preceded me. Pressure was on, right? I got to be good. I can't disappoint these people. I know. How do you do that? So I come on stage, and I knew some people had come from Japan, and I know a little bit of Japanese. So what I did, I started with a greeting in Japanese, and oh boy, they cheered and they applauded. I guess they never expected it, right? So I connected with them, and then I followed my presentation by making them laugh because I tell them stories. Because I think sometimes people come to these conferences already stressed and wondering what is it that they need to do. So I make them laugh. That way they relax a little bit, and then I inspired them, and I gave them a lot of illustrations of how I was able to have my book reach #1, how I travel, and how I am accomplishing these things even though I'm blind. And so at the end, when I was walking off stage, they were helping me down the steps, and the gentleman helping me down whispered, and he said, "Janet, they're giving you a standing ovation." And I thought, how kind. And then I heard the MC say, "I think we can all agree that Janet can be called the excuse eraser." And I realized then what I had done, Mike, in essence, is show them how to know the difference between an excuse or a true limitation. If it's an excuse, you need to learn how to erase it and move it out of the way. If it's a true limitation, you have to use your creativity to get around it. And that's what these salespeople needed to find out, needed to maybe remind it. And it's so rewarding to be able to get that message across. I remember at the end, they were lining up, they wanted to comment and give you a hug and that. And one man said to me, I have heard so many motivational speakers, and I've heard a lot of presentations, and we're motivated and inspired, but sometimes that just fades away. But what you share, he said, transformed my heart. I'll never see my situation the same again. Wow, Mike, that was just so profound because that is my purpose. People say, well, she's blind. Well, I don't have that disability. I can't relate. But everyone has an issue they're facing. Everyone has a degree of pressure or stress or something that's overwhelming. And they just want to know, how do I still live with joy, with success, and with triumph? So that was a really memorable moment for me.
Yeah. And, it makes me think of when you were kind of even formulating that mentality for yourself, you started to gain some momentum because when you started helping others, it got the focus off yourself. And even in the fact of helping your family and making sure they were taken care of and helping, and then maybe that first person that you started to encourage because of your situation and your blindness, that first person might have been that one catalyst that got that focus off yourself, and it started to get that momentum. And then, I'm sure you have hundreds and hundreds of stories like this gentleman that says, wow, this really changed my perspective, or you changed my life, and that just reinforces.
In fact, the most frequent, I should say, comment I get is, I came here just so down on myself. I felt my life was just falling apart. But after hearing you speak and how you overcame so much, I have nothing to complain about. I'll never see my life the same ever again. That's pretty deep, and that is something that, of course, does encourage me. But more than just a presentation, more than just a message, what I want to do is to help them see that when you face all this junk in life, all this darkness and bad news and violence and that, you need to have a mind that's transformed in such a way that no matter what you're facing at the moment, you will still have peace. God says that He gives us a peace that goes beyond all understanding. And let me tell you a story about that. Back in April, I was traveling quite a bit, back to back to different states, and one of the trips was to Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador. And when I got there, and by the way, I travel by myself when I use the white cane, and I travel myself. It's one of the most enjoyable things I do. People think I'm crazy, but I do. So I landed in Quito, and the woman who's supposed to wait for me wasn't there, which usually they are. They're very kind. They're always waiting for me as I arrive off the plane. So the man escorting me, the airline personnel escorting me to the exit of the airport, he was pulling my bags. I was holding onto my white cane and holding onto his arm. And we got there, and he said to me, well, what does your friend look like? And I thought, I don't know. I've never seen her. So I said, don't worry, I said to him. She'll recognize me. We waited half an hour. There was no one to pick me up. I had no cell phone service because, it's another country. And for a moment there, I thought, this is interesting. I thought, what if I traveled to the wrong country in the wrong place? So I asked him, tell me this. I said, is this Ecuador? He said, yes. I thought, oh, good, the right country. Is this Quito? Yes. He said, I thought, I'm in the right country. I'm in the right city. I think I'll just stay put. Now, I had a choice right there, Mike, too. Oh, my goodness, what am I going to do? I don't know anybody here. I don't know my way around. I can't see. I'm in a different place, in a foreign place. Worry, fear, anxiety could have been what filled my heart, right? But it didn't. I was perfectly peaceful. I figured eventually somebody's going to come, right? My point is that sometimes we put in situations where a setback, a glitch, or something that doesn't work out catches us by surprise. But when you have your mind and your heart in that mode of peace, in that mode of, you know what, something will happen, it'll be okay, then you save so much energy from the stress that you could have felt. And that is really what I like to convey. And, of course, my friend showed up a couple hours later. The airline gave her wrong information, telling her the trip was delayed. The flight was delayed 3 hours, which wasn't true. So, everything ended up fine. But my point is that sometimes we just have to have that new mentality, that new way of thinking.
Scripture teaches don't worry about tomorrow, let tomorrow worry about itself, meaning we've got enough to worry about today, what's right in front of us. And if you start worrying about tomorrow, you're bringing tomorrow's problems into today's problems.
And you know what happens when you do that? You steal the joy of today. You steal
or guess what? Let's face it, some days aren't joyful, so it might not be stealing today's joy, but it might be compounding today's pressure unnecessarily. Maybe God only meant us to deal with 10% of pressure today because of whatever the circumstance is, but you're bringing 30 or 40 more % on because you're worrying about tomorrow. So there's no guarantee that, today should be joyful, and now you're going to steal that, and that might be the case on some days. But guess what? Some days are just dark and down, but they don't need to be 10 or 20% or 30 times more than that because you're looking around, and it kind of tends to be, and this is, I think, human nature, but tend to be like, oh, this one's bad. Oh, and it reminds me, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, and all of a sudden you got this big, huge, compounded pity party going on.
And that reminds me, Mike, you're so right. Some people ask me when I'm interviewed, they say, what is the one thing you would share with my audiences, one thing that they should do to be able to live a triumphant life no matter what? And my answer is precisely what you just said. What do you think about? Change your thinking. Whether you're in a church and you're in a women's group, or where you're in a MOPS group, or an executive in a corporation, your thinking is going to determine your mode of action and the outcome and the results, because it's in the thinking that everything begins. Your thinking is going to dictate your words and your attitude, and sometimes the path that you take. So with me, I have to, first of all, the first thing I do in the morning is think about all the things that I'm grateful for. That, yes, during the day, as a blind person, I'll have challenges, but I also think that God has the power to resolve them. And yes,
that there are many, many, many scripture references about thinking positively and the way we think. And I think a lot of people think, thinking positive is New Age and the Bible doesn't teach. Well, guess what? I'm not saying, law of attraction. I'm not saying think these things and you're going to have poof, this magical thing happen. But you know what? Scripture does teach us what's in the heart comes out. Well, if what we're thinking about is, Lord, today open up a good way for me to make a positive impact for someone out there. And thank you so much for your blessing of this and blessing of this. And then that gets back to gratefulness. Well, that's positive thinking, and the Bible teaches us to do that. Let's keep it in balance and not go in the other way, which is, all the other aspects, but let's just keep that good, right approach. And I think that's what you're saying that is so effective.
I think so, yes. I agree. God does say, anything pure and noble and excellent, praiseworthy, think about these things, and that's absolutely true. And often when I do speak, I bring in this point, but I also illustrate it with real-life examples that people can take away with and think, okay, how can possibly my way of thinking impact the way things turn out in my life? And, in fact, I'm getting ready to fly to Michigan, and I'm going to be doing a talk about being strong and courageous, because my latest book is Contagious Courage. How do we become courageous? How do we have that resolve to overcome and to move forward? And in this time when there's so much stress and fear, well, it all begins with your thoughts. And God said, be strong and courageous. Do not fear, do not be discouraged. And it's because He has a greater plan. He has a more powerful way to deal with things that we could ever do. And what if we thought about that alone? I remember when I first started to be invited to speak in different places in other states, people would say to me, Janet, you have to have somebody go with you. How can you travel by yourself, being blind? And my first thought was, why not? God is with me. Why do I have to be afraid? You see, it began with my thinking. What if I would have started to think, she's right. What if I miss a flight? What if somebody doesn't help me? What if I end up in the wrong place? See, those negative thoughts would already defeated me before I began. And so when I write and when I speak, these illustrations, and I bring a lot of course, I do a lot of props. I like to use things so that I make the message more memorable. They literally can see the illustration, how they themselves can make a difference by the way they change. And the other aspect too is gratitude. So.
Yep. And you mentioned what if. What if I miss this and what if I can't do that? Well, what if you flip it around and say, well, what if I can? And what if and have you ever heard of Mark Batterson? He's a pastor in D.C., and he's written a lot of books, and he's got a book called If, and I think he goes with the what if and the as if, but he goes, if we can think of the what ifs and act as if we have that, through Christ and all of these things, well, it's just that mindset shift. Sure, you can say, what if I fall down and what if I miss my flight? But what if you don't? And I think that just kind of like, yeah, that's very true. And you
what
also
if God would open doors I never thought of? What if somehow He would bring technology for me to be able to operate my computer and write books?
And also you brought in peace and thankfulness and gratefulness. And, Colossians 3 teaches, let the peace of God rule in your heart, to the which you also called in one body, and be ye thankful. And I think it's interesting how peace and thankfulness are in that same verse.
You know how I learned thankfulness and gratitude, Mike, is when we suffered another tragedy. My youngest son, 19, was murdered. He was stabbed 23 times. And that tragedy, which now we see it seems to be almost common nowadays, that tragedy could really set you back, could really paralyze you. And I know many people that it has. Their lives have stopped because of that profound, unthinkable tragedy. But I remember when we heard those news in the emergency room, the Lord spoke so clearly in my heart. He said, be still and know that I am God. What He was telling me in the midst of all the stuff that's going on back then in my mind, my world turned upside down with grief. Obviously, it was just so unexpected. But today, that same thing is happening over and over again. But God is still the same. He's asking us to be still, to know that He is God, to know that He will bring the peace, the comfort, and the grace to be able to help us move forward. So I had to decide, again, choices, right? I had to decide to be grateful to be so grateful that I had that promise from him, that he will lift me out through my tragedy, that he would comfort me during nights when I couldn't believe our son was no longer with us. I had to believe and be grateful that I didn't have to carry that pain on my own. So this is a message I usually bring to women's groups. And in fact, just recently I spoke to a MOPS group talking about how moms can feel so guilty and, so overburdened, and it's because they take so much upon themselves. But instead, what if we were grateful that God is with us in our mothering? God is with us in our ministry. God is with us in that boardroom when we have to give this report, when we have to perform in the workplace. What if we realize that God, Almighty God, the creator of the universe, is with us? Wow. Doesn't that turn to a sense of gratitude and say, goodness, I don't have to face this world alone. I don't have to carry this unthinkable heartache on my own. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord,
And then when you stub your toe walking to the kitchen, it's not as traumatic as it could have been because you're in the right frame of mind.
You're so funny, Mike. You mentioned that a couple of years ago I did exactly that. I turned around and I hit my toe against the frame of the door and broke it.
Oh, no.
Broke my foot, broke my toe and everything. But when I went to the doctor, he said, I have to stay off of it. And I thought, are you kidding me? I can't stay off my foot. I was flying to Wisconsin somewhere to do a talk, and I thought I have to travel. So my husband got me a wheelchair, and there I was. And I wasn't even thinking of this, but the guy says, ma'am, can you stand up? I said, yes, but I have to be real careful. He said, well, your seat is right over there. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I can't see. And it dawned on me, wait a minute, I was lame and blind.
Yep.
I didn't realize it until he asked me to do that, and I thought, oh, they really think I'm putting on the show here. I'm blind and
right.
at the same time. But you know what? That didn't stop me because my passion and my focus is on what can I do to inspire people, motivating, but more than anything, transform their mind and their thinking. Because that's what God says, do not conform to this world, but be transformed and renew your mind to something that's better, that's something that's more triumphant and victorious.
You've mentioned some of your message and speaking presentation topics of being strong and courageous and being grateful and thankful. What are some of the other main topics and messages for your presentations?
Good question. And the beauty about this is that whenever someone invites me to speak, they determine the topic according to what their group needs. I remember speaking to a group of realtors, and they mentioned to me the fact that a lot of them were having personal problems, and that was affecting their performance as salespeople, as people who needed to be leaders. They just didn't have it because so much was going on in their personal life. So that talk is how to overcome personal obstacles to reach professional success. Because, see, Mike, whenever we talk about being successful in a career, in a workplace, it's difficult to do when you're carrying the chains of personal conflict, of personal heartache, or personal disappointment. In fact, just where was I? I think I was in New Mexico, and I was speaking to a group. It was a church gathering. There were men and women there, and a man came up to me and he said, nobody can tell, but my life is falling apart. My marriage is about to end. My kids are suffering because of it, and my heart is not in my job. I'm about to lose it. And he said, but you just gave me the path on how to move beyond it. And now for the first time, I think there's hope that I can make it. And I'm thinking, Mike, all it took was for someone to bring it up to him and say, yes, you can overcome your personal conflicts. Not have the results immediately there, but there's a way to bring triumph and to bring that joy in spite of heartache, in spite of loss, in spite of tragedy. So it's something that, I'm very grateful. I can tailor each message. Of course, now I have another one that's called the 4 E's of excellence. How do you reach excellence when odds are against you? And for women, I have the spot for the soul. How to be able to take time out to rejuvenate ourselves, to refresh our heart and our mind, to be able to have that new outlook in life. For moms, I have this guilt, the gift that keeps on giving, and how to overcome it. And so, sometimes I come up with some titles or topics depending on what the group needs.
That's awesome. And when some meeting organizers or event coordinators are thinking of choosing a speaker, what should they expect when they invite you? And then what are some ways that they can reach out and connect with you to learn more about your speaking engagement opportunities? Good
question. What should they expect from me? I think that they can expect from me someone that's really easy to work with. I like to be flexible. I like to be able to work with people, help them out as much as I can. And I usually do. I help them with the planning as well, because a lot of them want to know, how do we publicize this? How do we promote you? And so, of course, I give hints and I give them suggestions so that we can make that event the most successful they've had. What I also hope they expect from me is the results that go beyond their expectations. I want them to know that what I say I will deliver, I will. And lately what I've been doing is I've been saying and stating the fact that if they're not pleased and delighted with what I say, the message I bring, and the impact to their group that they expected, they don't pay my fee. This way I have the confidence that God will use me, whether it's, like I said, a corporate event, a sales group, a MOPS group, a women's event, a retreat, that God will help me to be able to bring the message specifically that's needed for that group, for that person, to be able to have their life changed. How they can contact me is very simple. They can just go to my website, and if they hear this message, they can go to www.giftfromjanet.com, and they will receive a free gift as soon as they click there. And there's also a contact page there as well. Of course, through Facebook and LinkedIn and Google, they can find me there also and become my friend.
I've heard it said, look at my Google resume, meaning Google my name, and there's my resume. And so these days we're so connected. So giftfromjanet.com, and it's been a real pleasure listening to how some of the life-changing impacts you're making. And I just want to encourage you to keep on doing that, because that one life and that next impact that you make in someone's life is just so important. And, someone at your next talk might need to hear just those words, and I know you know that, but it's just so exciting to hear that so frequently you're getting that feedback, and it's, they're not just giving you the golf clap and smiling and high-fiving, they're actually feeling that impact, and God's really blessed you with that platform. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. It was a joy to be with you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.